Hey, if you want to learn how to make a little golden book journal, this is the tutorial for you. I'm going to show you how to make a traveler's notebook system out of your journal, and I'm going to show you a trick for attaching the fabric that you may not have tried before. I'm Melissa from pinkpaperpeppermints.com, and here we go, y'all. Hey y'all, it's Melissa. Welcome to my channel. I'm so glad that you're here. This is the journal that I showed on Instagram that y'all were interested in learning how to make, so we're going to do that today. I've used some vintage wrapping paper and vintage fabric and modern fabric and a vintage doily, which is kind of coming off, but we're going to fix that later. And it's ready for the trim, but I want to show you how I did the fabric part, so we're going to use a different book. It's a Disney book, Tangled, which is one of my favorite Disney movies. And I don't know if you know this about me or not, but I am kind of a Disney fanatic. My family and I love going. We go every 2 or 3 years. We save up to go. I love everything Disney. I make Disney junk journals and I make Disney crafts. I make my own ears. Seriously, I'm a freak. I know this. But if you are a Disney nut too, I would love to hear about that in the comments. And I've got some Disney junk journals that I could show and some Disney techniques. So maybe you'd like to see that. So let me know in the comments. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take apart our book, and you could cut it apart or use an X-Acto blade, but I like to just kind of tear it apart gently because I don't want to rip my pages or my cover. And I like to reuse the pages. So what I do is I just kind of gently pull on it until I can feel that it's loosening up and bend back the spine a little bit, as you see I'm doing here. And then usually you can give it a good tug and it'll come apart. And then I'll pull the pages out. The pages are going to have 2 big sharp staples in them, so be really careful. And you can just use a staple remover to pull those staples out and set them aside. And I like to use the pages in my journal later. I take them apart and cut them up. Sometimes I cut pictures out of them, but I like to keep those intact and set those aside to use later. So the first thing that we're going to do now that we've got our covers apart is we want to cut a spine. And what I use is just chipboard, recycled chipboard. You can see this, I think, was a glue palette before. And I'm just marking the height of the cover so that I make sure that my spine is the same height. And I'm going to cut that out. You could use a cereal box or packaging. Any kind of chipboard will work. And I'm actually going to cut 2 spines because I want the thickness to equal the thickness of my covers. And so I'm just going to cut 2 and I'm going to tape them together. And I'm using a Scotch packing tape to keep those together. That is what was closest to me, but you could use any adhesive to keep those together. We just want to hold them together while we're wrapping them with the fabric. And so now I'm trimming off those little mini spines from the golden book, and I'm going to use those later, so I set those aside. And my spine is 2 3/4 inches, and I'll put all the measurements in the description below for you, so you don't have to remember those right now. It's 2 3/4 inches wide, and my fabric will be 4 inches wide. And that's going to be enough to cover the spine and then go over the edges of the front and back covers a little bit by about 1/2 inch or so. So I now need to cut out my fabric, and I usually use scraps of vintage fabric and lace and sometimes modern fabric, and I've got that all done here. I'm just going to lay it out and make sure that everything fits together nicely and that I like the way it looks before I'm ready to add the adhesive. And you know, if you get something cut a little crooked or if it doesn't line up, don't worry about that. We can always fix that later once we get it adhered. We can add trim and we can cover it up some way. So I really like the way this looks. This fabric in the middle is the only one that is not vintage. It's a modern, I want to say the name is London Dina by Westminster, I think. And so I like the way that looks. So now I'm going to get ready to adhere everything. One thing I wanted to show you is what I did here was I just made some little flaps, and that was the size of the scrap that I had, and then I put a different fabric over the top. If you have a big enough scrap, you could just wrap the whole thing around. So we're going to use Heat and Bond Ultra for our adhesive. It's an iron-on adhesive, and I know a lot of people use liquid glue for this. I just like the really smooth bond that Heat and Bond gives. It makes your book cover so smooth and nice. And the liquid glue, sometimes I have trouble with it. It's bumpy or it kind of soaks through the fabric. So this is a little more fiddly, but for me it's worth it. And you have to kind of decide that for yourself. But I'm going to show you how I do the Heat and Bond. Super simple. You just want to cut it out the same size as your fabric, and there's going to be kind of a scratchy side that's going to go flat against the back of your fabric. I lay a piece of parchment paper down so that I don't get any glue accidentally on my ironing board, and that's what I'm doing here. And you're just going to line up that fabric. You're going to flip it over so that the paper is on the top side, and you're just going to press for 1 or 2 seconds. Right now we're just trying to get that adhesive bonded onto the fabric. So we just need 1 or 2 seconds, and then we're going to let it cool. And you're going to do that with each piece of your fabric. You're going to lay it out, press it for 1 or 2 seconds, and let it cool. Once it's cool, we're going to just peel that paper backing right off the back of our fabric. And you're going to see it's got like kind of a milky coating of that adhesive. And you can see there I've accidentally left a little bit of adhesive overhang. So I'm just going to trim that off because I don't want that to melt and stick to my iron or my ironing board or just anywhere that I don't want it. So I'm trimming that off. Once I get that trimmed off, we're going to wrap it around the cover of our book. When we're ready to start pressing, we're going to lay a piece of parchment paper over the top, and then we're going to press for about 5 or 6 seconds to get a nice tight bond. We're going to do that on all 3 sides. And you can kind of tell, you can feel the texture changes a little bit. You can tell that the adhesive is melted onto the book. And you just want to be careful because the book is really hot after you do this. So now we're going to do the back side. You can kind of see that my design is shown through the fabric. So if that bothers you, you might want to put a lining on your fabric, or you could try gessoing the cover. I have not tried using heat and bond over gesso though, so I'm not sure that that would stick. You could experiment with a little piece of chipboard and see if that worked. I'm not too worried about the design poking through. I'm going to be adding lace and things to my cover, so I don't mind that the design shows through. So you can see I've left a little bit on the edge there because my spine fabric is going to cover those edges, so I'm not worried about that. So I'm trimming my fabric here for the front inside cover. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm lining it up. I'm going to remove that backing paper carefully, line it up, lay some paper on top, and press it for 5 or 6 seconds. And again, I'm leaving that right-hand side. I don't worry about that because my spine fabric is going to cover that, even though it's a little crooked. Some of that might show, so I might have to put some trim over that, but that'll be fine. We'll cover that. So this part is really important that you get these 3 pieces lined up at the top so that your book is even. So you want to lay them out and make sure they're even. The other thing you want to do is make sure that you leave 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch of space between the spine and the front and back cover. And you can see I'm kind of using my scissors there to judge that space and make sure I leave that space there because that's how your book is going to be able to open and close. So I'm just ironing just a little bit at a time. I had a little bit of extra fabric overhang there that I'm trimming off, and I'll use that later. And totally forgot to put my parchment paper down here. I think I start getting excited towards the end of the part that I'm working on, and I completely forget what I'm doing. But I'm going to press this down, and then I'm going to take my scissors, and you're going to see that I'm going to put it into the creases and just kind of make sure that that gap is there and that it's even. Using my scissors and bending those covers up while the fabric is still warm. And that just makes sure that I'll be able to bend those covers open and close. Okay, so now we're caught up with the original journal, and I'm going to use some Fabrifix liquid adhesive to try and fix that doily. I used a spray adhesive, and on the inside it stuck really well there, but on the outside where it was more lacy and delicate, it did not stick at all. So I'm going to try the Fabrifix, and I'm going to squeeze it on in the places where it's a little more solid and on the edges of the doily. And actually, this has dried since I filmed this video, and it worked fantastically. It doesn't come up at all, and it's really solidly set to my cover. So that's probably what I'll use from now on for lace and doilies and things like that. And I just found if you squeeze a little bit on and then press and hold with your finger for a minute, that seems to help the glue set better. So now I'm going to work on my trim, and I'm just auditioning some different laces and ribbons and trying to decide what looks best. I want a real little girl look to this journal and trying to decide, do I want pink pom-poms? And the answer is yes, which I think the answer should always be yes when you ask about pink pom-poms. But I'm using the Fabrifix again here, and I was going to do just a little bit at a time, and then I was like, no, I'll just do the whole thing. I tend to be kind of an impatient crafter. You might be picking up on that. And especially as I start getting closer and closer to the finish of a project, I just want it to be done. I'm not a big measuring kind of person. I don't know. Are you an impatient crafter? Do you measure? Are you very precise? I want to be in my heart. I want to be, but when I actually start making things, no, I'm not. I just want it done. Okay, so I'm going to finish up the trim now, and I'm just picking out different ribbons and lace that look nice with my spine fabric and layering those up. And then I decide on the doily, I think I want to cover up the raw edges of that doily, so I put a little bit of crocheted lace there using the Fabrifix, and that worked really well on that as well. And now our trim is all done and we are ready to bind our book. And we're going to do a traveler's notebook style binding. Okay, I don't know why I can't talk today. All right, so I'm using a 0 center ruler, and I want to find the center of my spine and mark that about a 1/2 inch down from the top and a 1/2 inch up from the bottom. Then I'm also going to have 2 other holes on either side of that center hole, and they're going to be about a 1/2 inch apart. And I'm using a Japanese screw punch and a self-healing mat underneath my cover, and I'm just going to punch those holes with that. You could also use a crocodile or a hand hole punch if you have that. This is 2mm elastic string. Usually you can find that in the jewelry department of your craft store. And I'm measuring out about 4.5 to 5 times the height of my spine so that I have enough elastic string. I'm going to go through the center hole with the right side, and with the left side I'm going to go through the left hole. And I'm going to pull that center string, I want to leave about 5 inches, 4 or 5 inches. And then I'm going to use the other string to thread through the bottom hole on the inside, up through the middle hole on the outside, and then all the way back up to the top. And this gets a little tricky. You might want to use a tapestry needle if you have one to pull it through. Once you start having more than one piece, it's a little harder to get through. Then I'm going to go back inside on the right, pull that through, and back outside on the right, back through the center hole now. Again, it's a little tricky. I think that I ended up using an embossing tool. Yep, you can see it in my hand there, an embossing tool to push that elastic string through. And now I'm just going to test the tension of my strings and make sure I like the tension, and then I'm going to tie a knot in that center piece, and that's going to give us 3 elastics for our inserts. And the reason I like using this style for my journal is just it's fun that I can take these my inserts in and out. I can sew, I can paint, and then I can even reuse my cover if I want to. And so I'm just checking right now to make sure, yes, this is 7 inches and that's what I wanted for my inserts. And our book is bound and ready to go. And I'm super excited because next week we are going to do signatures. And I have so many things that I want to show you. I cannot wait. I hope you will join me next week. And thank you so much for being here today and staying till the end. That makes me so happy. And I will see you next time here on Pink Paper Peppermints.